We think about experiments as something that is done in hard science, like a chemistry experiment or medicine, like a clinical trial to test a new prescription drug. But because they're really good at demonstrating one thing causes another, many scholars use them in political science as well. This video describes how experiments work and the different types of experiments that we use in political science. First, just a reminder about different types of research. Observational studies gather information that exists already in the world, but experimental research creates a new set of information that the experimenter can control. The researcher sets up a scenario in which they can control potential causes of the outcome that they are interested in, and then uses that setup to vary the cause to see if it changes the effect. Let me go through a basic example first. Let's say we're talking about a clinical trial for a COVID-19 vaccine. The researcher will identify a group of people for the study and then split that group into two further groups. What is most important here is that the way people are split into groups is random, like the flip of a coin. That means that whatever differences exist among people in the initial sample, they get evenly spread between the two groups. One of these groups then gets the treatment, in this case the vaccine, and the other gets a control, a placebo or a fake treatment. Then we see what happens to the two groups. In this case, see if one group is more or less likely to get COVID. I'll give you a political science example in a second, but first I wanted to clarify two vocabulary issues. First off, when we talk about scientific research, we use the word random in two different ways. Tragically, neither of which is, that is so random. We talk about random sampling, which refers to how you choose people for a survey or a clinical trial. The point here is to make sure that they represent the population that you're interested in. If you choose a large, random group of people, it should represent all the different parts of the population equally. It'll provide a representative sample. In experiments, we do what's called random assignment. For those people who are in the study, we randomly put them in one group or another, treatment or control. The reason we do this is to make sure that these groups are identical to each other. If we really randomly put people in one group or the other, then everything unique and weird about them should be randomly distributed between the two groups. Or, in terms that we care about, anything that might affect our outcome aside from what we think is the cause, any alternate explanations, are evenly distributed between the two groups. The other vocabulary problem is about the word control. When we talk about statistics, we talk about control variables. These are the alternate explanations that we rule out by taking them into account in a regression. In experiments, when we talk about the control group, though, we mean the group of people, or cases, that did not get the treatment. They are the opposite value of the independent variable. Now, this is going to make a little bit more sense with an example. This slide shows the research done by a scholar named David Niven in a 2003 mayoral election. He wanted to study whether negative campaign advertising affected voter turnout. What he did was select a group of voters and then randomly divide that group of voters into two groups. One group he sent a negative ad to, and the other group didn't get anything. He then checked the voting records, which are publicly available, and then looked to see if the people in the combined group voted or did not vote in the election. The outcome, the dependent variable that he was looking at, was voting, and the independent variable was receiving a negative advertisement. Again, this was divided into a treatment group that got the ad and a control group that did not get the ad. Since he randomly selected people to receive the ad, any alternate explanations, here labeled control variables, that might explain voting, such as gender or race, were randomly distributed between the two groups and therefore can be ruled out. This is just one example of how we use experiments in political science. That study was an example of what is called a field experiment, where a researcher does work in whatever environment they look to study. By far my favorite field experiment ever done in political science was led by James Habyarimana, and it was about the effect of ethnic diversity on public goods provision, essentially whether ethnically mixed areas get more public services or not. He and his team were testing how ethnicity might matter, whether different groups have different preferences about what they want, whether they use different networks to communicate, or whether they adopt different strategies in looking for public services. Some of what they did was have people in Kampala, that's the capital of Uganda, and that was where they were doing the study, do what is called a lab in the field experiment. They sat citizens of Kampala in front of laptops and had them play games, where they could choose to work or not work with different people. The computers randomly varied the ethnicity of people on the screen, creating an experiment. The field experiment was testing the idea of social networks. They selected people of different ethnicities and assigned them to find somebody else in the city of Kampala, like literally to go out and find somebody else in the city. They found that people were more likely to cooperate with people who they identified as being of the same ethnicity, and they were more able to use existing networks to find people of their own ethnicity, which ultimately makes it easier for them to produce public goods. Other types of experiments include survey experiments, where scholars randomize which version of a question they ask respondent to see how that impacts what they say. And there are natural experiments, where some outside factor assigns cases to a treatment, and we treat it as if it is an experiment. And that is the topic of the next video.